Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, my dear brothers and sisters. Welcome to Dome Podcast. And I'm your host, Hatim Al Abdissalaam. And today we have a special guest. Our honorable guest today is Brother Muhanna bin Saeed Al Harthy. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Muhanna.
Wa alaikum salam.
How are you today?
I'm very fine, alhamdulillah.
Brother Muhanna is an entrepreneur and a consultant. And today we're going to talk about a very emotional topic, which is the relationship between couples, spouses, and so on. So, Brother Muhanna, as you know, this is an important topic, and it touches all of us because each one of us has a spouse, has a family member, has a relationship with couples, and so on. So we come across a lot of good news and bad news, yeah? True. But today we are putting the dots on the letters and we are discussing the matters of marriage. So the first thing that I wanted to bring up is the valid reasons for getting married. Why do people get married?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's an interesting topic, and like you said, it's really a topic that one ought to think about very deeply. Whatever you've mentioned so far, alhamdulillah, is in the realm of halal.
Yes.
So even the bad news, they're still in the realm of halal, although it's abghad al-halal and Allah talaq.
Yes.
But because people, like you asked, why do people get married? And that's the first question I ask couples I speak to. Why you guys get married? You find people not coming together for the right reasons. Or they come up with reasons that are very limited in terms of time and pliability. So you go like, so why you get married? The typical answer from men is, I want to safeguard half of my religion. I want to safeguard myself from fitna, which is a result. It's not the cause, it's not the goal.
Yeah. Or maybe some of them would say, I like someone.
Or
I like what I see.
So yeah, usually it goes like, those are the typical answers I get.
Yeah.
And then the one would be like, because I was looking for the right person. But like I tell them, how well do you know that person? And if the person changes, what happens to the marriage?
Yeah.
So it's always about coming together for the right reason. Allah Ta'ala said, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. For that's the reason, sakina, serenity, comfort, stability. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. These are the two support pillars that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides to each married couple if they come together for His purpose.
Yes.
Because Allah promised الَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So we ought to think about that very properly. We ought to encourage our brothers, children and friends to do that in the proper manner. Because when the person says, because I like her, so I said, is it love? Because if it is, lust always is time bound unless it's supported with other
Did you mean
pillars.
love or lust? Or both?
No, because they come together.
Yes.
You lust for something because you love it momentarily. It's either because of the looks, the way it made you feel during that moment,
Yes.
the euphoria of getting it. Once it's there, it flares away. Unless there's mawadda and rahmah that reflect into the sakina, into the comfort, into the stability.
And this is what we normally tell the young people when you ask them, what are you looking for? And they give you a description of someone who is described in heaven. Yeah, like Hur al-Ain. And in reality, beauty or someone being pretty, it's not a wrong criteria. You have the right to choose someone who is pretty.
Definitely.
But that beauty is temporary. Because after 6 months or 1 year of marriage, realize that I'm looking at the same face every day, and changes do happen. Yeah, the beauty fades and everything else changes in a person. But the only thing that remains is what you have mentioned, is the tranquility and the peace that you find with this person. What about family, Brother Muhanna? Does family play a role in influencing our decisions to get married? Like sometimes you hear mothers, especially.
Yes.
They come to their sons and they say, "I want to see your grandkids."
Absolutely, and a lot of youngsters come and say, "It's about time. My family is encouraging me, or my family is pushing me." And families could be either a guiding tool or a support, or there could be a pushing support that is either taking you to the wrong path if one doesn't decide. So basically, it's a two bladed sword. It could do good and could do bad. So a lot of and it's on both sides. So a mother would go like, "I'd like to see my grandchildren from her son," and then the girl would be said, "No, this is a good family, we know about them, so you ought to get married from them," which is the right thing. But you do not do that at the end of the rope. You need to prep these youngsters that we know best. They need to be together with the family so they know the family too. They need to be primed for that moment. Otherwise, they feel that they're pushed into it.
Brother Muhanna, you know that a believer strives throughout his life to become better, to become a better worshipper to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, does marriage get what is best within yourself? Do you become the best version of yourself when you get married? Or can you be the best version of yourself without getting married?
You can't. You can't be the best version of yourself without getting married, because we were destined to become couples. ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا. So we were destined to get to that level of being a couple.
Yes.
You change completely from being singular to a couple.
Yes.
And the Arabic word zawj is one unit, unlike a pairing of two units in its English meaning. And that's when you become whole. That's when you become the best version of yourself. But you do not go into a marriage with all your troubles and say, "She'll fix me," which is a mistake that a lot of people do.
Yeah, talking about this, you find families, they
Yes.
have a son who is, a troublemaker. He's into drugs, he's into alcohol, he doesn't pray. And then the family recommends a pious woman or a pious young lady to be his wife, thinking that, again, the same idea that you mentioned, that, oh, this woman will change him and make him a better person. So we take this puzzle of a man who is bits and pieces all over the place, and then we associate it with someone who is a worshipper, obedient, a righteous person, and sometimes we destroy the life of the woman because of this. We get them into a marriage that is not balanced in terms of character between the two. I don't know if you came across.
That happens a lot.
Yeah,
that happens a lot, and it's quite an imbalance even from its beginning, because if that person who came was poor, they wouldn't say, let them get married and Allah will bring barakah and they get richer later.
Yes,
they will not wed him off. So if it's just about not respecting the character of that woman or the family that raised their girl to that age to be able to be a good person, and you want to wed her off to a son who's less than that.
Yes.
We don't say get only wed off perfect people, but if a person is not a worshipper, if he's having habits of drugs, of alcohol,
smoking,
and you wed him off to your daughter who you've raised properly in a pious house, she is safeguarding herself, and you're going to expose her to such an environment. It could go any way. She could influence him, or the other way around.
Yes.
In that way, she could lose her akhirah.
And the kids as well. They would be influenced because the father is a role model. Both of them, I think, are role models.
Subhanallah.
Whether the husband is pious or the woman is pious, any other party in this marriage who is not on the straight path will have an influence on the children. So somehow you have to make sure that both of them are on the same page when it comes to marriage. Now, I'm sure anyone who gets into marriage has a lot of expectations. What are the expectations that someone should expect before getting into a marriage?
I think we ought to speak about one bit before getting to expectations, because you have expectations, that's why you choose a certain person. The choices should be governed by certain characteristics that you know of a person. And we typically get to know spouses or wants to get married. You hear your mother met her mother in a wedding, or your sister knows of her friends, or you typically have played with their brother, or the father knows the father, you get introduced. Those are the typical channels and paths. Nowadays, the youth meet one another at work, in unis.
Social media.
Interestingly enough, I met my wife in social media, but very, very long time ago.
Yeah.
What you see, is not the perfect picture or the truth. Therefore, you have to scrutinize. You have to know the person before you have the expectations set. So you either have a fixed set of expectations that you say they are rigid. I will not change them for anybody. This person has to fit. You are setting yourself for failure.
But when you mentioned that you need to find out more about the person or scrutinize the person, the channels are very limited to get to know the other party, especially in our society, in our conservative traditions. It's not so easy to find out about the other person. It's not only for the women, even for the guys, because sometimes you get a call from a family member asking you about someone, a young man, because this young man came to propose in their family. And it's almost very difficult to find information. You have to be working for the CIA too, to find, solid information about a person.
Yes.
And sometimes, looks are deceiving. Sometimes people, you see them, they're kind, they are open, they are generous, and so on. But the case is totally different when you live with the person.
Most definitely.
It becomes a total nightmare.
Most definitely.
So, how do you go about that?
Like we're talking about, the channels that are available today.
Yes.
Are people meet at work, meet at a place of studies like universities, and most likely social media, because people don't talk anymore.
Yes.
You speak to a person and says, I saw you on Instagram yesterday, so why are we talking today?
Yeah.
They on Instagram, they are the best version of what they want to be perceived. So you get to look at that timeline, and is this a person I want as a wife or husband? But if you work with them, then you do spend about 8 hours around them. And you can't act every day. So you would see...
You won't be wearing a mask.
Every day.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the truth will reveal itself. So you get to set expectations. So like I said, you have a fixed, rigid set of expectations. And then I'll try and pick the person that fits. So either the person morphs himself to that, tells you, I'll be that. And as soon as he's a wife or husband, to tell you, no, this is me. Or you say, these are basics of whom I want. I will not accept anything below this, especially when it has to do with worship, especially when it has to do with family relations, because what they are is what your kids are going to be, especially to do with any abusive background.
And when we are talking about these expectations, it's from both parties. We're not talking about men here.
Absolutely.
We're talking about both of them.
Absolutely.
Because I think the assumption out there is that only men get to choose.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But I remember my grandmother, may Allah have mercy on her soul, used to say, the same way you choose a person, you are also chosen.
Most definitely.
It means also the woman gets to choose. If you don't fit that criteria, if you don't fit that expectation, guess what? She's going to say no.
Yes.
You're not good enough for her to be as a husband.
But that's where the family plays a role. If one is disconnected from the family because he sees that the values that the families carry do not fit him, he ought to find himself good friends that can guide him to better ones. Those who are lucky enough to have good families, they ought to adhere to those. And we remember that we have never been husbands before the first time we got married.
Yeah.
We've never been wives before our sisters got married. So therefore they need to look at who's been there. And our parents are humans. So they all have their goods and bads. You say, I'll take the goods and apply them into my marriage. I'll take the bad stuff and I'll make sure I never do it to my spouse. I will learn from my siblings, my cousins, my surrounding. That's where you get to filter. But a lot of men tell you, I'm like my father. He'll take the good, the bad, and the ugly.
That's the thing, Brother Muhanna, is that sometimes these ideas are embedded in our subconscious mind because we grow up, we see our parents treating each other in a certain way.
Yes.
And we tend to think that this is the way it should be. But basically, as you said, you have to filter. And I think filtering only comes at the age of maturity where now you can distinguish that, oh, okay, this method doesn't work and it shouldn't be this way. So marriage is like a university. You keep on learning. The more you progress, the more you learn from your mistakes and you try and rectify what is wrong and complement what is right, and you carry on the journey. You don't want to let go of the second year or third year of university because you did some mistakes.
Definitely.
You want to continue to graduate.
Definitely.
And that's the whole objective, that you want to reach to the end line with your spouse, which is paradise.
So being the best version of yourself, it's whatever you said right now, it takes us back to that point.
Yeah.
One, it doesn't want to come with flaws into the marriage, but it can come with promise to himself or herself that I'm going to change this, either during the engagement period or as soon as I can. So continuous improvement with the mawadda and rahmah that Allah Ta'ala has promised these couples, this blessed
Tranquility
couples.
and mercy.
Mawadda is
Kindness.
friendliness.
Friendliness.
Yes, is keenness to feel comfortable around a person.
Yeah.
And rahmah. These two bring you to the tranquility which is sakina. So between these three, one finds support to be able to continue being better every day. Once you do that and you both strive to that, you should reach the goal of graduating, like you mentioned. But there's never graduation, because while you're trying to master the role of a husband and she's trying to master the role of a wife, now you also have to play the role of a father. And you are choosing to the best of your ability, because that's the first responsibility of a man towards his unborn child, choosing a good mum. Girls have to choose too, because she has to live with that person day in, day out.
Yes.
But this is where the family plays a role. When she is influenced by any family member that, no, you go get married, but your dad's house is always open to you. You're self-sustained, so you shouldn't be bowing down to a man. There's no obedience, but there is understanding that we are not equal. I was given responsibility over you. Allah Ta'ala said, الرجال قوامون على النساء ما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. So men do have a responsibility. It's not that they're better. It's just that
it doesn't mean that they have the upper hand.
They don't. But because they're responsible, then they should be consulted on everything that his wife does.
And they are accountable for the affairs of the family.
Most definitely.
Yes.
So I tell a lot of boys that we speak to, a lot of men that we speak to, just before they get married, I was like, if her father taught her everything about religion, you're lucky. If he didn't, then it's your responsibility after you said qad qabilt in that sebla where there's a lot of people around you, hundreds of people, the more the merrier. They all have seen you take an oath. That's very heavy. And the importance of setting these expectations for the girl is that she will not, like you said, men think they want to get married to Hur al-Ain.
Yeah.
There isn't a reflective picture of that, of men of heaven that the girls want. But they end up wanting somebody who is from a Turkish movie or Turkish series. A model that they overlook all the flaws. Or they want to, no, I want to finish my career, get to a certain level, and then get married. But you're not getting any younger. There's a lot of fitna around. So the expectations should be, if his religion is good, if he comes from a good family, if he can take care of you with the minimum and basic requirements, then there is no reason for one to refuse.
And then there's a misconception that marriage, stops you from progressing.
Subhanallah.
And that's why a lot of young people now, they're delaying marriage until they graduate, until they build a house, until they get a car, and until they establish a career and so on. But then you're almost 35, 40, and you're not there yet. So marriage, in my opinion, it assists you to progress in life, and not the other way around. I'm sure maybe there are a few bad examples where people got married very early and they were not able to progress. They took it as an excuse, but that's not the case with everybody.
Getting married early is my envy to a lot of people, because they get to grow up with their kids. They get to enjoy the best years of their lives with their kids. So 20s or early 20s specifically is less than 10 years from you became a pubescent, bulugh. So it's almost matching to the number of years you were in your parents' responsibility, 10, 12, 13 years.
Yes.
So by the age of 20, 21, 22, you go to uni with your wife and you have no issues with the fitna that's there in the universities. Or if you already started working, it's the same thing. I'm going home with stability. But expectation setting or where we're going with this marriage should be set up front. So after I listen to all their reasons, sometimes they're really off, especially with the girls. They are told that marriage is a lot of compromise, a lot of problem solving, meeting the expectations of the other person.
You have to be very patient.
You have to be
no
very
matter what
patient.
he does to you.
It's like, so you still want to go ahead with this? You get me? With all this that you were told, she says, yeah, because I think he's the right person. And they're never told about their rights, حقوق, about shurut that they can put for the marriage. They're never told
conditions.
The conditions, yeah. They're never told about that he is responsible for you.
I want to take you a little bit back to when you mentioned the oath.
Yes.
When we say in the mosque, yes, I agree, قد قبلت. And I think a lot of us, we think of the wedding, the beautiful bride, the plate of mandi in front of us. We don't listen to the words that are uttered in that place. When the sheikh says that you have to comfort her, respect her, take care of her, that's actually a documented contract with Allah.
Absolutely.
and we're taking oath.
Absolutely.
But and then when we are settled, after we come back from the honeymoon, we tend to forget everything that we said, that we promised to do, and we do things our way, which is a calamity.
Absolutely.
Yeah? And I think husbands and wives should go back to the wordings of that contract and think about it and make sure that they are in line with what they promised Allah to do.
Subhanallah. Some of them are already married, and the woman does not know the oaths her husband took. So what's she helping him against?
SubhanAllah.
Yes. I met a couple that's married, and the woman does not know the oaths that the man has taken. So when we're talking about she has to be an assistant to him towards reaching the goals, and meeting his oaths, she did not know.
You know, mentioning this, and then we'll go for a short break. Mentioning this, I have noticed that some communities here in Oman that are a minority community, they actually, the women actually attend the mosque on the day of the nikah.
MashaAllah.
And they are on the other hall, on the other side of the mosque, and there is a live broadcast on the screen, so the bride gets to see what the groom says and what he agrees on, because there's a long list of conditions, and the bride gets to be one of the witnesses of those conditions. While when we come to our communities and our cultures, when the nikah happens in the mosque, the women are busy in the saloons, beautifying themselves, and this is their right. This is something it is their day.
Yes.
But I think it is important for them to at least get a video of the ceremony, listen to it, and maybe even discuss with the husband before or after marriage about those conditions. Maybe she wants to add another conditions, maybe she didn't like any of the conditions, and so on, because this is her right.
Brother Hatim,
we don't do that. That's the idealistic world.
No, I agree with you. But at that moment,
hold on to your answer. Let us take a short break.
Sure.
And then we come and address this issue.
Inshallah.
Dear brothers and sisters, we're going to take a short break and then come back to continue this hot topic. See you then. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome back to Dome Podcast with our honorable guest, Brother Muhanna bin Saeed Al Harthy. We're talking about relationships and marriage, and we were talking about the oath that we take on the day of nikah.
Yes.
And you were saying?
I was saying that moment is too late. Because even us as men,
yes,
when you're there, you're saying yes to anything that
because you want to get married, you want to get it done.
You want to be wedded off. So
Yeah.
you go like, yes. Anything he says, you just say yes to it. But you should have thought about it beforehand. You should have been given a copy of what you're going to say yes to. Like contracts, you'd read a work agreement in and out, back and forth. But that's one of the most important agreements you take for the rest of your life.
SubhanAllah.
So even if you talk about other communities where the woman is in the other hall, she is just an attendant. She's not in the right mindset to scrutinize those 4 heavy oaths of great kinship, of guarding her from all harm, of being with her with what's known, ma'roof, وتسريح بإحسان. Some of these are results. If you did not do the first one, the second one will never be there. So these are heavy oaths that are well structured, properly worded, that should be told to them that this is what you're going into. This is what you ought to support to one another. So when you talk about improvement, if you guard these 4 oaths, you're going to get into improvement. Marriage does not hinder anybody from continuing on with life. It's just that these goals should be common.
That's the thing, Brother Muhanna. Nobody's interested in the wording. Nobody's interested in the oath. People are interested in other things, the materialistic things, the wedding, the wow wedding, the food, the people, greeting, taking pictures, and so on, the honeymoon. So we take care of all the details,
Yes.
except the oath, which is the most important one.
Most definitely.
And then we bear the results, the consequences. Even if you looked at the statistics for this year, in terms of divorce rates, they have increased dramatically.
Skyrocketed.
And nobody seems to understand, and nobody seems to take it seriously to look into the root causes for this. Why is it happening? Why is it a lot of young people, some of them 1 month, 2 months of marriage, and they get divorced, despite the reality that our grandparents, they had a lot of arranged marriage, very young. They got married very young, but it lasts for 40 years, 50 years. While now people know one another, they are friends before marriage, they talk to one another, they discuss things, but once they get married, 3 months, they get divorced. Some of them even come back from the honeymoon, they are divorced. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of educating ourselves the rights and responsibilities of marriage, and parents and communities and the mosque and the education system, and all of this has to work in line to educate the youth on this topic. I think we move on to the next issue is respect and communication, where it is vital and very important that you have both. You can have respect for your spouse, but you don't communicate whatsoever. And this is the caveman theory. Men are very good at that. Yeah, they just keep issues to themselves, and they don't open up. They don't feel like opening up, or it's not part of their nature. And also communicating, where when communication happens in all different channels, but there is no respect. So whatever comes in your mind, you just say it. You don't choose the time, you don't choose the words, you don't choose the tone, you just say it, just because you want to communicate what you feel.
Subhanallah.
So what can we say about that, Brother Muhanna?
Respect is again a given. You respect, you receive respect back. But you are going to respect your spouse if you had chosen them for the right purpose. If you're supposed to help one another reach Allah's pleasure, Ridha Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then most definitely that respect is going to be there. You'll be revering one another.
Yes.
Like we said, you can't be wearing a mask every day, especially with your wife. So like we said, we're human, so we're all flawed. But you do not try and show your worst picture to your wife just because she's your wife, or your husband, so that we're equal foot. So respect is about communicating, but communicating in a manner you would like to be communicated to. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. So if it's just a brother in Islam, she is your wife. She's the closest person to you after your parents. So therefore you have to treat her with respect. And respect is whatever doesn't make her feel broken. So sometimes a tolerance towards a tone is understood with mu'ashara, with long living together.
Yeah.
But you can't come from the first day and start raising your voice because she couldn't hear you. And if you do, you have to fix it very quickly. And you do not tolerate anything that is not acceptable. You say, I'll fix it later, especially on the fundamentals. That's why we said some fundamentals have to be set up front. You say, I do not compromise on these.
Yeah.
These are typically hududullah, the limits of Allah set. Tilka hududullah, فلا تقربوها. Don't even get close to it. In case they do not transgress them. Tilka hududullah, فلا تعتدوها. You said lines that should not be crossed. When they do, you do show that you are upset in a respectable manner. But sometimes we say, this is an issue that will break the tranquility and comfort we have. I'll postpone it. As soon as you do, it snowballs. It becomes a bigger problem for later. When you come and explode, you will not be talking about the main subject. So it breaks the importance for discussing.
You're going to bring up all the history.
Exactly. And that's very unfortunate. But it's typically how people behave. And if you are to become the best version of yourself, you ought to be a good communicator, especially with your spouse.
No, I think when it comes to feedback, getting feedback from your spouse, I think one of the important things, Brother Muhanna, is not to be defensive. Because either you have asked for the feedback or you haven't. None of us is perfect.
Most definitely.
And the Prophet ﷺ says, a believer is a mirror of his brother.
Most definitely.
And your spouse is actually reflecting what you are and who you are.
SubhanAllah.
So you either take it and accept it, or be an arrogant person and be defensive.
Definitely.
When you are given feedback, you look at it. Some of the things that you might think they are not right, try and clarify it, because there is always misunderstanding, and we're going to talk about that. But if you find that your spouse is right, then there is room for improvement and
Most
development.
definitely.
And honestly, I remember when I was still a teenager, my dad used to say, the person who loves you tells you your shortfalls.
SubhanAllah.
But the person who is like an artificial friend or artificial companion, he will just go along with you.
Very true.
He was not going to tell you that, no, you should improve in this area. So, you shouldn't be offended when someone tells you the area of you to be developed. And this is lacking, honestly, this relationship with the spouse when it comes to the feedback, getting or asking or demanding feedback. I think, especially us men, we have difficulty in accepting the reality. And I was training myself to do this. I remember I started with my daughter. She was around 10.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat with her and I asked her, Habibti, do you think I'm a good dad? She looked at me and she said, yeah, I think so. And I gave her a piece of paper with full confidence. And I said, can you write down the things that you think I should improve and develop? Man, she started filling the page, and then she flipped the page, and then she asked for more paper, and I was like sweating. This is my 10-year-old daughter. What about if I ask my wife? I'm going to be in trouble. But I think it's an eye-opener of the idea of feedback. It's good to see what people think of you.
Most definitely. Feedback is important throughout life, but because of the importance of the marriage and the spouse, that should be the most important and truthful feedback. We should give feedback as much as we would like to receive it. Sometimes you do understand that your spouse has some traits that have been there. You do not keep on banging that nail every day.
It's part of their nature.
Part of their nature. You accept that.
Yes.
You can change it in the long term, but you don't go back to that point every day. But if it's something that just came up that's out of the norm, you do address it immediately, in the right manner, in the right presence. If it's done publicly, you do not speak about it publicly, but you also make sure that the feedback is portrayed back to the public when it's done again, number one. Number two, the feedback should be fair. Sometimes it's a perception. Sometimes
give us an example.
You can't judge on the way a person looked to somebody. Maybe they were not looking at them. They were dazed somewhere else. And you should ask. When you get the answer, take that answer as a truth and then give feedback. or it's based on facts. So the differentiation between the two is where a lot of shaitan comes and gives a lot of waswasa. The devil comes and says,
He's good at that.
absolutely, and that's a promise he gave. And in one of the descriptions of the shaitan in the Quran, they separate between husband and the other.
Yeah.
They separate between the couples, and we should, a lot of marriages or a lot of couples go through life forgetting that they have an enemy, and the enemy is shaitan.
You know why they forget about the enemy? They consider the spouse an enemy.
La hawla
Yeah.
wala quwwata.
They consider the spouse as
As a
a
foe.
competitor.
Mm.
And arrogance steps in because he doesn't talk to me, so I don't talk to him. He doesn't apologize, so I don't apologize. So the battle is between the spouses, forgetting that someone is instigating this feeling between them,
Sure,
which is shaitan.
most definitely, and arrogance is a trait of shaitan. One of his names is al-gharur.
Yes.
So one should be careful about the presence of shaitan in their marriage. Again, if the goal is the pleasure of Allah, then no, wake up, my husband, my wife, wake up, let's pray Fajr on time. Let's do dhikr, let's remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you go through life. Normally, you work to the best of your ability, you try and earn as much as you can. If it's education, you try and earn the highest of degrees. My husband, have you prayed dhuhr? I'll call you after salah. It's a reminder. It's an indirect reminder. You get me? He came back from work and he's asleep. Wake him up for Asr. Because Salah al-Wusta, Allah Ta'ala has asked us to make sure we keep it, we preserve it.
Again, going back to the arrogance issue is don't judge the person who wants goodness for you. So, yes, you're 40 years old, you know what you're doing, you know your faith, but if someone wants goodness for you and reminds you to remember Allah, you shouldn't be offended.
Definitely.
Isn't it?
Being offended is sometimes a defense mechanism. But it's because you decided to, excuse me for the expression, expose yourself to your wife physically, but you do not want them to be observant of your real flaws. Why was I going through the path of salah? Because that's a basis. If you are a couple that doesn't pray, you ought to come back and pray. That sets the basis of your relation. You leave salah, you have done a big sin, and you will going to have instability in your marriage. The arrogance comes in where you think you are better. The self-defense is sometimes can be mixed up with arrogance. Where you see your wife or the husband sees his wife as an enemy, is when they think they're touching upon that weakness that they're trying to hide.
Yes.
They do not have to hide it, because only when she knows what's wrong with you, only when he knows what's wrong with you, they can fix it, or they can help you get there. So the goal is about becoming a better person to reach the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Feedback is a very key thing in the right voice of tone and in the right issues.
I want to touch upon communication a little bit, because communication, it removes a lot of barriers. Sometimes you might do a certain act and the opposite, not the opposite, your spouse might assume something else. And if you don't clarify, then it becomes an issue. And I give you a classical example that happened to one of the couples. Every time they go to the market and the wife asks the husband, to buy something for the kids or to go for dinner and this, and then the husband frowns, so the wife thinks that the husband is stingy, that he doesn't want to spend on his family. So a few months later, she noticed that this is going on so many times, so she decided to communicate and ask him about it, and she said, and the way she said it is, don't you love us? Don't you like us? Don't you care about us? Why do you get offended when we ask you to, buy something for us? And he was like shocked with that statement, because he said, no, I'm not. It's a privilege, it's an honor for me to spend for my family. The only thing is that I always feel bad that I don't have enough money to cater for your needs, and that's why I feel depressed. When you ask me to buy something and I don't have the means, I feel depressed, because I feel that I'm not doing my part.
Sure.
And that's the reason why I'm frowning. It's not because of you, it's because of me. You see, this very simple issue could have been resolved if there was channels of communication from both sides. I'm not saying
most definitely
the wife should have asked the husband, but the husband also should have told his wife, I wish if I can do more, and this is making me so sad because I can't, spend. And the wife would understand if she loves you. But the lack of communication then comes up with a lot of assumptions, and our friend, the shaitan, he's good at that.
You said something very important when the wife went and says, you don't love us or you don't like us anymore.
Yes.
Sometimes as men, we say, I've shown it with my actions.
Yeah.
So you should have known that I loved you.
Yeah.
But if you went to a person's house and asked for their daughter in marriage,
yes,
and she is being told by her dad every day, I love you. So she shouldn't lose that because she moved houses and she agreed to become your wife.
yes.
She should hear and reinforce that I do love you. Even when we're upset with one another, I still love you. I'm upset with your action. And the sentence before that, you said we shouldn't judge.
Don't personalize the issue.
We shouldn't judge anybody. Period. لست عليهم بمسيطر. You do not control them. We judge. We have an opinion, or we dislike the actions they did.
Yes.
We like everybody. We like everything around us. But we do have a choice that this is bitter. I don't like it. But I don't hate coffee for the sake of it being coffee.
Yes.
So I do not dislike this person or this child at any moment of their life. I love them, and that love grows because of the keenness, mawaddah, and mercy, because they're weak when they're children, when they're little, when the wife is delivering your child. So we don't judge in any case. All we do is that action wasn't proper. Can you justify that action? Once you get the justification, you say, okay, I do not condone this, but under this circumstance, I understand. But guess what? Love wasn't changed. It can grow because of how long you spent with one another, how much either times you shared, moments you shared, keep that keenness closer. But at no moment should a woman think her husband doesn't love her. No, at no moment should a child think that the father does not love me. And that feedback needs to be both in actions and in words.
Yeah. Inshallah, we'll continue on more points, inshallah, after the short break.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome back to Dome Podcast. With our honorable guest, Brother Muhanna Al Harthy, and we're talking about relationship, and we were just talking about feedback and communication, and we want to talk about being selfish, Brother Muhanna, in terms of the relationship and coming close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what do we mean by being selfish?
You ought to communicate, you ought to give feedback, so you are happy. And like you said, a Muslim is a reflection of his brother.
Yes.
You're only happy because she makes you happy. But if you do not give feedback, that because you're selfish, because you want to be happy so you can keep her happy, or the other way around with the spouses, you will always try and be pleasant and nice and not talk about important and controversial subjects up to a bursting point. And I'd also like to say you need to be selfish here in dunya and also in akhirah. You do not want to condone and accept deeds that might lead you to a bad result in the hereafter. So selfishness will be in both fronts, here and there.
Give us some examples, Muhanna. So
I can't sacrifice things that are not in my control. So I can't say, I'll accept my wife smoking. I can't accept my wife drinking because I want us to have a happy marriage. Because every night I'll be going to sleep either with a bad smell or with a person who's half their mind. And above all this, there are
disobeying Allah
subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the biggest issue. But if I condone that, then I have sacrificed something that's not even my control. These are the limits we talked about. تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا.
Yes.
So we don't even get close to that. What you're sacrificing is your likings, colors of your room, the time you guys have breakfast. You try and find a compromise between those, but you don't go to fundamentals and do that. You get me?
Yeah.
Exposing our kids to today's craziness of LGBT, you do not go to those lines, because if you accept it and you say, I'll fix it later, it's beyond fixing at a later point. So you only sacrifice what you make sure that, but it's not one-sided. So you are selfish because you're a reflection of it. So nowadays, you find people transgressing on Allah's limits, and they say, no, because we want to be happy. There's no happiness that takes you to hell. It's about thinking of results of what you're doing here immediately.
So what are you saying, Brother Muhanna, is that yes, you should compromise, but not in the fundamental basics that will affect your faith. Anything else we can work around it and come to a middle point.
Yes.
Yeah, especially when kids are involved, they want to see that compromise. They don't want to see dad is on this corner and mom is on the other corner.
Most definitely.
And that's why the few years before having kids, it's the time where both of you sit together and discuss about how you want to raise your kids. Sometimes, the dad is going to say, you can't have soft drinks because they are harmful. But the mother will say, no, what's wrong with it? Everybody has it. So then the kids become very confused because both of them did not compromise and come to a middle point so that they can raise their kids in a way the kids are not confused. But I think I like the idea of being selfish so that you can get happiness at the end. What about toxic marriages?
It's about personal traits that haven't been addressed. So if a man is abusive and there's no feedback, the woman is not selfish. So she cries every night on her pillow, but she doesn't tell him because she was told to tolerate. She was told marriage is sacrifice. She's going to be suffering quietly until the moment of bursting.
It becomes a prison. It's not...
Absolutely. If a woman has an overspending habit, and the man, because he's a provider, he doesn't want to show that he cannot afford it, he reaches a point where he's either too heavy in debt or where he can't support the habit. It's toxic.
Yeah.
When the marriage is crowded and a person doesn't try and push off, says, no. There's too many people meddling in our marriage.
Yeah, so the in-laws, your parents,
friends,
the neighbors, friends, everybody gives an opinion.
It's not only opinion, but it's allowing it to become a public matter.
I want you to talk about that a little bit more, because I think sometimes, especially for women, when they don't get that communication channel with their spouse, and for them it is important to let it out, to get it out, they tend to seek, friends to talk about these issues.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's the nature of a woman.
Yes.
To be social, to let it out, to express her feelings and so on. So if Mr. Caveman doesn't want to discuss about the issues, and they have so many issues in their marriage, so my closest friend will be, my
confidant.
My confidant.
And consigliere.
Yeah, so, and then the problem with that is that you might get advice from someone who is not in your shoe, someone who is listening to the story from one side, and also at the same time you have the risk of the issues of your house to be
exposed,
part of the talk of the town, the discussion.
Sure.
Yeah, because it moves from one place to the other, and every time it moves, the version of the story changes.
Subhanallah.
And then you end up being an evil person in the sight of community because many people heard of what you did while you didn't do anything.
Subhanallah. That's not to do with the main topic of being selfish or toxicity. When I was talking about being too crowded, sometimes there's no time of choice of dinner. There's no time of choice of lunch. No time of choice of when to take a break, because it's all tied up with friends, family. So there isn't a special nature to that couple.
Yes.
Whatever you're talking about comes to the man's oath and the woman supporting him. So if he has friends who he will talk about his marriage with, who are not God-fearing, pious people, then he's exposing his marriage. Same thing with a woman. But if a man says, your friend so-and-so shouldn't be exposed to anything in her family, ask Allah to guide her. Pray for her for hidayah. Maybe you shouldn't be because I've seen something that's unpleasant. But if she's a good friend, you should ask your wife to get closer to her. That way she can have an ear and good guidance. God forbid anything goes wrong. God forbid she's looking for guidance and she doesn't want a man's opinion. Because sometimes if we were the best advisors to ourselves, then we don't need a spouse.
Yes.
But we're not. So sometimes we are logical by nature. Women are emotional by nature. Today, with work, with social circumstances, these roles have been mixed up. But we always go back to our nature. So sometimes she doesn't need advice from a woman. And that's where a man should always remember his oath. رَفْعُ الْإِسَاءَةِ عَنْهَا.
Yes.
Guard her from all harm. Harm could be her sister who's not God-fearing. Harm could be her mother who's playing the role that media has portrayed a mother-in-law. Harm could be a friend who they grew up together for a long time, but they have grown apart in terms of the way they think, who's not married, cannot give her advice about marriage. Harm could be a book that is toxic. So all this should be, a man should be aware of what's going on around his wife. That's why communication is key. So to summarize, Brother Hatim, you choose a wife that will bring you closer to Allah. You choose a husband that will bring you closer to Allah by bringing the best in you, by making you a best version of yourself at any moment of time. When you're weaker, she gives you feedback. When you are weaker, he gives you feedback in a manner that's acceptable to you. Even in the feedback, if it was delivered in a manner that's not acceptable, you give feedback on that feedback. Thank you for highlighting this. Next time, do not scream. Next time, do not do it in public. Thank you very much, my husband. I love you for giving me feedback.
And choose any means, even if you don't want
the
verbal confrontation, write it. Write an
it.
Email, write a message,
Yes.
write a card.
Yes.
There's so many means for you to communicate
Most definitely.
your message.
And love should always prevail. What I mean is that under no circumstance I've judged my spouse enough to say, for her to doubt that I love her, that I like her, that she is the most important thing after my parents, that she is key, because the hierarchy was set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After him, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا.
Yes.
So if a husband is bad to his parents, be careful, because your kids are going to be bad to you and him. Our kids want to become a version of us, a good or bad one. It depends on what they saw, because we hide some things from them.
Yeah.
The way you treat your wife is the minimum of what your daughter's going to expect. So if you're treating her like a queen, your daughter would at least be a princess in her husband's house and should know what's right and wrong. If you don't...
And she will have an idea of how to choose
Absolutely.
her future spouse.
So she will not end up in toxic relation.
Yes.
So that's a summary of what we talked about, Brother Hatim.
And I think we have only touched the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot to talk about in terms of a relationship.
Very true.
I think we should have another episode to discuss further when it comes to this important oath that we take in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is marriage. Thank you very much, Brother Muhanna bin Sa'id Al Harthy, and hope to see you next time, inshallah, to continue our discussion about marriage and relationships. Thank you very much. Dear brothers and sisters, thank you very much for watching Dome Podcast with me, your host, Hatim Al Abdissalaam. See you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.